Kieran Thornridge woke at 3:47 a.m., same as he had every morning for the past 15 years. The dream clung to him like smoke silver hair spilling across white linen, a voice calling his name through darkness, the scent of pine and rain, and something wild he couldn't name. He sat up in the massive bed, moonlight cutting through the windows of Obsidian Ridge Keep. His chest ached with a longing so fierce it felt like drowning. Somewhere out there she was suffering. The oracle had told him that much 10 years ago, her ancient eyes wet with pity. Your fated mate endures chains you cannot see. Find her AlphaKing before the world breaks her beyond repair. Kieran had searched 7 states, visited 200 packs, questioned thousands of wolves. And still she remained a phantom, a girl with silver in her hair and agony in her voice calling to him every single night. He rose and walked to the window. The Rocky Mountains stretched endless and dark beneath the stars. Somewhere in that wilderness his mate was waiting, or dying. He didn't know which terrified him more. Tomorrow he would resume the search. He always did. But tonight, like every night, all he could do was listen to her scream his name in his sleep. Or ma'am. 300 miles northeast in a house that smelled like stale beer and rot, Serafina Ashford woke to the sound of drawers being yanked open. Her bedroom door hung ajar, pale yellow light from the hallway cutting across the worn floorboards in a harsh, accusing line. She blinked sleep from her eyes. Her body ached the way it always did, deep in her bones, like something inside her was trying to claw its way out, but couldn't find the door. The doctors had called it a weak constitution. Her brothers called it pathetic. Sarah knew it was neither. She just didn't know what it actually was. Darius stood at her dresser stuffing clothes into a black duffel bag. He moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before, a quick, mechanical, no-wasted motion. He didn't look at her. He never did unless he wanted something. Sarah sat up slowly, the thin blanket pooling around her waist. Her voice came out, scratchy, uncertain. "What are you doing?" Darius didn't stop packing. He grabbed a faded sweater from the second drawer and shoved it into the bag without folding it. Packing. Her chest tightened. She looked past him to the doorway where Kane leaned against the frame, arms crossed, expression flat. He was watching her now, but there was nothing in his eyes. No guilt, no hesitation, just calculation. "Packing for what?" Sarah asked. Kane pushed off the doorframe and stepped into the room. He was broader than Darius, meaner in the subtle ways that didn't show until it was too late. When he spoke, his voice was clipped, dismissive. "Don't make this difficult." Sarah looked between them. Her pulse started to hammer against her ribs. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. "Make what difficult?" Darius zipped the duffel with a violent jerk. The sound was too loud in the small room. He slung the bag over his shoulder and finally looked at her. And in that moment, Sarah understood. She was leaving, whether she wanted to or not. "We're settling the debt," Darius said. The words landed in her stomach like stones. Sarah knew about the debt. Everyone in Timber Ridge knew the Ashfords owed money to dangerous people. She'd heard the late-night arguments through these same thin walls, the threats delivered over phone calls that made her father drink even more than usual. She'd watched her brothers come home with split knuckles and blood on their shirts, their eyes too bright with something that looked like fear. But she hadn't known she was part of the equation. "How?" Her voice came out barely a whisper. Kane's jaw worked. He glanced at Darius, then back at her. "You're going to Blackridge Pack. Ronan needs staff. You'll work for him and the debt gets cleared." Work for him. The words were polished, careful. But Sarah had heard enough whispers in Timber Ridge to know what happened to Omegas in Ronan Blackridge's territory. They didn't work. They served. They disappeared into cold compounds with high fences and came out hollow-eyed and silent, if they came out at all. "No," Sarah stood, her legs shaking beneath her. "You can't just send me there." Darius finally looked at her, really looked at her, and there was nothing behind his gaze. No regret, no second thoughts. "It's already done." The air left her lungs. Sarah turned to Kane, desperate now. He was the older one, the one who used to sneak her extra food when they were kids back before their mother died and everything turned cold and mean. There had to be something left in him, some scrap of the brother he used to be. "Please," her voice cracked. "You know what they do to Omegas there. Please don't make me go." Kane's expression didn't change. "You'll be fine. They'll feed you, house you. It's better than this place." Better. The word tasted like poison. "You're selling me. We're giving you a chance," Darius said. He adjusted the strap of the duffel bag on his shoulder. "Real alphas, real structure. You should be grateful." Grateful. Sarah looked past them to the dim hallway to the living room beyond, where she knew their father sat in his stained recliner, staring at nothing, drowning in cheap whiskey and bitterness. He knew. He had to know. "Dad wouldn't let you do this," Sarah said, even though the words felt like a lie the moment they left her mouth. Darius laughed sharp and ugly. "Dad signed the papers himself." Sarah's knees almost gave out. She grabbed the edge of the bed to steady herself, her fingers digging into the old lumpy mattress. The room tilted. The walls pressed in. "When's the truck coming?" Kane asked, like she wasn't even there. "Dawn," Darius said. "Get dressed." They left her standing in the middle of the room, the duffel already gone, the decision already made. Sarah stood there for a long time, staring at the cracked paint on the walls, the water stain spreading across the ceiling like a bruise. Her eyes landed on the single photograph tucked into the frame of her mirror, her mother smiling soft and distant, like she'd already been halfway to another world when the picture was taken. Sarah pulled the photo free with trembling fingers. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the image. "I'm so sorry." She didn't know what she was apologizing for not being stronger maybe, for not being worth keeping, for being born an Omega in a family that only valued power. Sarah dressed in silence. Jeans, a sweater, thick socks. Her hands moved on autopilot while her mind screamed. The house creaked and settled around her, every sound familiar in the worst way. This was the place where she'd scrubbed blood from tile grout after her brothers came home from bar fights, where she'd cooked meals no one thanked her for, where she'd swallowed bitter tonics every Tuesday night for as long as she could remember, tonics that Kane mixed in the kitchen, while Darius held her chin and tipped the cup to her lips, telling her it was for her own good. She was 23 years old and she'd never shifted. Never felt her wolf. The other Omegas in Timber Ridge whispered that she was broken, that whatever bloodline she came from had thinned out to nothing in her veins. Maybe they were right. Dawn came too fast. Sarah stood in the kitchen with her duffel at her feet, staring at the scratched table where her brothers sat counting cash. They didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her, just counted bills with the focused intensity of men who'd finally gotten what they wanted. Vaughn Ashford sat in his recliner by the window jaw, slack eyes, red-rimmed and vacant. He didn't look at her either. Headlights swept across the front of the house. Sarah's breath caught. "They're here," Darius said. The knock on the door was sharp, efficient. Kane opened it, and cold morning air rushed inside. A man stepped into the house, tall, broad-shouldered, with dead eyes and a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He wore black tactical gear, and the scent rolling off him was leather and gunpowder, and something darker Sarah couldn't name. "Kalen Reed," he said. His voice was flat, empty of inflection. "Blackridge sent me." "She's ready," Darius said, gesturing at Sarah like she was furniture. Kalen's gaze swept over her, clinical, detached, assessing. He stepped closer, circling her once. Sarah stood, frozen shame burning hot in her throat. This was an inspection. She was livestock being evaluated before purchase. "Unclaimed?" Kalen asked. "Unregistered." Kane confirmed. "No pack ties, no close connections." Kalen nodded slowly. He pulled an envelope from inside his jacket and handed it to Darius. Sarah watched her brother's fingers close around it, watched him tear it open, watched him count the bills inside his face, relaxing with each one. $75,000. That's what she was worth. "Let's go," Colleen said. Sarah's feet wouldn't move. She looked back at her father one last time, hoping, praying for something. A word, a protest, anything that would prove she'd mattered even a little. Vaughn Ashford stared at the wall and said nothing. Kalen's hand closed around her upper arm. Not rough, but firm. He guided her toward the door, and Sarah grabbed her duffel and let herself be led outside into the cold Montana morning. Two black trucks idled in the driveway, engines rumbling low and predatory. Kalen opened the back door of the second truck and motioned for her to get in. Sarah climbed inside. The leather seat was cold beneath her. The door slammed shut, and the sound was so final it felt like a coffin closing. Through the tinted window, Sarah watched Darius and Kane standing on the porch. The envelope was still in Darius's hand. They didn't wave, didn't look sorry, didn't look like anything at all. The truck pulled away, gravel crunching under the tires. Sarah turned in her seat and watched the house shrink into the distance. The sagging porch, the broken railing, the peeling paint, The life she'd never wanted but had clung to anyway because it was all she knew. Now it was gone. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and closed her eyes. Her brothers thought they'd sold a burden, a mistake, a weak Omega who would never amount to anything. They didn't know they'd just handed a queen to the one man who would never let her be traded again. The drive took 6 hours. Sarah watched the landscape change through the window-cracked streets, giving way to dense pine forests, then to flatlands marked by chain-link fences and industrial buildings that looked more like prisons than packed territory. The air grew colder. The sky pressed down gray and heavy. Kaylin sat in the front passenger seat silent. The driver never spoke. Sarah hugged her duffel to her chest and tried to keep her breathing steady, but panic clawed at her ribs with every mile. When the trucks finally stopped, the sun was high and merciless. The doors opened and Sarah was ushered out into a compound that made her stomach turn. Steel buildings, concrete walkways, razor wire coiled along the tops of chain-link fences like metal serpents. The air smelled like rust and diesel and something rotten she couldn't identify. There were no trees, no grass, just gray and cold and the sense that nothing good had ever happened here. "This way," Kaylin said. He led her toward a low building with narrow windows. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly white glow that made Sarah's skin look corpse pale. A woman in gray scrubs met them in the hallway. She had a tablet in her hands and didn't bother looking up. Name: Serafina Ashford. The woman typed without acknowledging her. Beach. 23. Claimed to know, registered a note. The woman's mouth thinned in disapproval. She snapped a plastic bracelet around Sarah's wrist. The tag read, "Unregistered Omega. Low threat. Leave your belongings here." The woman pointed to a row of metal lockers along the wall. "You'll get them back if you earn clearance." Sarah's fingers tightened on the duffel strap. Her mother's photograph was inside, tucked between layers of folded clothes. "Can I keep my mother's photo?" The woman sighed, impatient. "Fine, everything else stays." Sarah pulled the small photograph from the bag and slipped it into her pocket. The rest, what little she had, she placed in the locker. The woman slammed it shut and locked it without ceremony. "Follow me." They walked down a long corridor. Sarah glimpsed other Omegas through open doorways, some sitting on narrow bunks, staring at nothing, others standing with their eyes down as guards passed. One girl had bruises mottling her arms in shades of yellow and purple. Another flinched violently when a door slammed somewhere deeper in the building. Sarah's stomach twisted. She wanted to run, but where would she go? Back to Timber Ridge. Back to brothers who'd sold her for $75,000 in a clear conscience. The woman stopped at a door marked Processing Room 4. "Wait here." Sarah stepped inside. The room was small, clinical. A metal chair bolted to the floor. A camera mounted in the corner, its red light blinking slow and steady. She sat, hands folded in her lap, and waited. Minutes passed, then an hour. The fluorescent lights hummed relentless and migraine bright. Finally, the door opened. A man stepped in, older than Kaylin, with graying hair and a face like carved stone. He wore a tailored suit that looked obscenely out of place in the cold industrial setting. When he spoke, his voice was smooth, controlled, the kind of voice that had practiced sounding reasonable. "Serafina Ashford." It wasn't a question. Sarah stood quickly, instinct screaming at her to show respect, even though every cell in her body wanted to spit in his face. Ronan Blackridge circled her slowly, hands clasped behind his back. His eyes moved over her with the same clinical detachment Kaylin had shown, but there was something else beneath it, something calculating and cruel. "Your brothers tell me you're a hard worker." Sarah said nothing. She didn't trust her voice. "You'll find we have high standards here," Ronan continued. He stopped in front of her, tilting his head slightly. "But if you follow the rules, you'll be treated fairly." Fairly. The word rang hollow, a lie wrapped in silk. "Do you understand?" And yes. The word barely made it past her lips. "Good." Ronan's gaze lingered on her a moment longer, cold and assessing, like he was measuring her worth down to the ounce. Then he turned and left without another word, and the door closing behind him with a soft final click. Sarah exhaled shakily. The woman in scrubs reappeared and led her to a dormitory lined with bunk beds. Most were occupied. The Omegas inside glanced at Sarah, then quickly looked away. No one spoke. No one smiled. The silence was thick and suffocating. Bottom bunk, far corner, the woman said. Meal hall opens at 6, lights out at 10. Don't cause trouble. She left. Sarah walked to the bunk and sat down on the thin mattress. Around her, the other Omegas moved quietly, some whispering in low voices, others lying still and staring at the ceiling. No one welcomed her. No one asked her name. She pulled her mother's photograph from her pocket and stared at it until her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. 3 days passed like that. Sarah learned the routines. Wake at dawn to a buzzer that sounded like a fire alarm. Eat in silence in a cafeteria that smelled like bleach and overcooked vegetables. Work assignments handed out by guards who never smiled, cleaning duty laundry, sorting scrubbing floors, until her hands cracked and bled. At night, she lay in her bunk and listened to the other Omegas cry in their sleep. On the fourth day, everything changed. Sarah was in the basement laundry room folding linens that smelled like industrial detergent when a guard burst through the door. Everyone upstairs, now line up in the main hall. The Omegas scrambled to obey, fear sharp in their eyes. Sarah dropped the sheet she'd been folding and followed the others up narrow stairs into a wide corridor she hadn't seen before. It was cleaner here, the walls painted. Instead of bare concrete, the floors polished. Omegas were being arranged in a line against the wall, backs straight, eyes down, hands at their sides. Sarah found a spot near the middle, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Whispers rippled through the group like wind through grass. What's happening? Inspection. Who's coming? Ronan didn't say. A guard barked at them to be quiet. The whispers died. Sarah bit her lip and focused on breathing. In, out, in, out. Then she heard it. Engines, heavy, powerful, the deep rumble of military-grade vehicles. The sound of a convoy arriving. Boots echoed in the hallway outside, precise, synchronized, disciplined. The main doors opened and cold air rushed in. Sarah's skin prickled. A man entered first, tall, broad, dressed in black tactical gear. His face was hard, unreadable. Behind him came others moving in tight formation, all wearing the same dark uniform, with an insignia on their shoulders Sarah didn't recognize. And then he walked in. Sarah's breath caught. He was taller than the others, broader. His presence filled the room like a storm barely leashed. Dark hair was silver at the temples. Sharp jaw, eyes the color of winter steel. He moved with the kind of confidence that came from never being challenged, never being denied, never being told no. Alpha, the word whispered through her mind, undeniable and absolute. But this wasn't just any alpha. The way the guards stiffened, the way even Ronan Blackridge stepped aside, shoulders tight and jaw clenched. Everything about the moment told Sarah this was someone powerful beyond measure. Kieran Thornridge, someone whispered. The AlphaKing. Sarah's knees went weak. The AlphaKing, the ruler of all northern packs, the man whose name alone made grown wolves lower their gaze. And he was here. Kieran moved down the line of Omegas, his expression cold and evaluating. He stopped occasionally, asking curt questions in a voice that demanded answers. Where are you from? How long have you been here? Who brought you? The answers were stammered, terrified. And then he was 3 Omegas away from Sarah. Then 2. Her pulse roared in her ears. She kept her eyes on the floor, every instinct screaming at her not to draw attention. But then his footsteps stopped, directly in front of her. Sarah's heart slammed against her ribs. She didn't dare look up, didn't dare move. The air shifted. She felt him lean closer, heard the quiet inhale as he scented her. And then everything went still. Kieran didn't move, didn't speak. The silence stretched so long that Sarah finally helplessly lifted her gaze. Their eyes met. The world narrowed. The noise of the hall, the press of people, the cold fluorescent lights, all of it fell away. There was only him. Only those storm gray eyes locked on hers, wide with something she couldn't name. Shock, recognition, hunger. Sarah felt heat bloom under her skin, a pulse so fierce it stole the breath from her lungs. And inside her chest, deep, deep in where she'd felt nothing but emptiness. Her entire life, something stirred. Her wolf, no, not stirred, roared. Kieran's jaw tightened, his hand lifted, and Sarah watched frozen as his fingers brushed her wrist where the plastic ID bracelet sat. The touch was light, almost clinical, but the heat of his skin burned like a brand. Name. His voice was low, rough, like gravel scraped over stone. Serafina. Her own voice came out, barely a whisper. Serafina Ashford. His fingers lingered a moment longer than necessary. Then he stepped back, his face shuddering into something unreadable. But Sarah saw it, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands flexed at his sides, the rapid pulse beating at his throat. He felt it too. Kieran turned to Ronan, who stood nearby watching with narrowed eyes and barely concealed fury. This Omega, Kieran said, voice sharp as a blade. Why is she unregistered? Ronan's expression smoothed into practiced calm. Her family couldn't afford registration. We're helping them. Helping, Kieran made the word sound like an accusation. She came here willingly, Ronan added. Sarah's nails bit into her palms. Willingly, as if she'd had a choice. As if $75,000 and her brother's greed hadn't made the decision for her. Kieran's gaze flicked back to her just for a heartbeat, and she saw something flicker there, cold and lethal. Rage. She's coming with me, Kieran said. The hall went silent. Ronan stiffened. Your Majesty, with respect, she's under contract with Blackridge Pack. Crown law supersedes Pack contracts. Kieran's voice was ice. If an Omega is unregistered and potentially trafficked, I have the authority to take her into Crown custody for evaluation. Ronan's jaw worked. He looked at Sarah, then back at Kieran. Whatever he saw in the AlphaKing's face made him step back. Of course, Ronan said tightly. Whatever the Crown requires. Kieran motioned to one of his men, a beta with kind eyes and graying temples. Escort her to the vehicle. The beta stepped forward, his expression neutral but not unkind. He offered Sarah his arm. She took it, her legs shaking so badly she thought she might collapse. As she was led past Kieran, she felt his gaze on her, heavy, burning, possessive. And then she was outside, the cold air hitting her face like a slap, her lungs pulling in oxygen that tasted like freedom. The convoy of black SUVs sat idling in the compound yard. The beta opened the door to the middle vehicle and helped her inside. Sarah sank into the leather seat, her whole body trembling. The door closed. Through the tinted window, she watched Kieran emerge from the building, moments later, his expression carved from stone. He slid into the front passenger seat without looking back at her. The convoy pulled away. Sarah sat in stunned silence, her wrists still tingling where he'd touched her, her wolf still pacing restlessly under her skin like something wild and newly woken. The AlphaKing had just taken her from Ronan Blackridge's compound. She didn't know if she'd been saved or claimed. But as the miles stretched between her and that cold steel prison, as the mountains rose up around them, dark and endless, Sarah realized something. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. The drive was long and silent. Sarah sat wrapped in a borrowed coat someone had handed her, too large, smelling faintly of pine and leather, and something else she couldn't name. The scent was oddly comforting, like safety made tangible. She watched the landscape change outside the window. Flatlands gave way to foothills, then to mountains that rose like black teeth against the sky. And then she saw it. Obsidian Ridge Keep. The fortress rose from dark stone perched on a cliff that overlooked a valley so deep the bottom disappeared into shadow. Torches burned along the walls despite the daylight casting warm, flickering light against the black rock. It looked like something out of legend, powerful, ancient, untouchable. The convoy passed through heavy iron gates that swung open at their approach. Guards stood at attention, their faces hard and disciplined, their eyes tracking the vehicles with the focus of soldiers who'd seen real combat. Sarah shrank deeper into the borrowed coat. The vehicle stopped in a wide courtyard paved with dark stone. Doors opened. Kieran stepped out first, and immediately people appeared around him. A woman with auburn hair, pulled into a severe bun, an older man with gray at his temples and a jaw like granite, others in tactical gear and formal clothing. All of them moved with purpose, with the kind of efficiency that came from years of working together. The beta who'd helped her into the vehicle opened her door now. Come on, miss. You're safe here. Safe. Sarah wasn't sure she believed that word anymore. But she stepped out anyway, her legs unsteady beneath her. Kieran stood several feet away, speaking in low tones with the auburn-haired woman. He glanced at Sarah once, just once, and something in his expression softened before he looked away again. This way, miss. The beta gestured toward a side entrance. Sarah followed, acutely aware of the eyes on her. Servants, guards, people, she didn't know all of them, watching the strange Omega the AlphaKing had brought home. Inside the keep was warmer than she'd expected. Fireplaces roared in stone hearths large enough to stand in. Tapestries hung from the walls rich and dark, depicting battles and wolves and ancient ceremonies. The floors were polished wood, not cold concrete. Everything spoke of power and permanence. The beta led her up a winding staircase and down a long hallway lined with heavy wooden doors. He stopped at one near the end and pushed it open. Your room. Sarah stepped inside and stopped stunned. It was enormous. A four-poster bed dominated the space covered in thick blankets and soft pillows that looked like clouds. A fireplace crackled on the far wall, already lit and warming the air. Tall windows overlooked the valley framed by heavy curtains in deep blue. There was a desk, a wardrobe, a sitting area with cushioned chairs. It was the most beautiful room she'd ever seen. Maids will bring you clothes, the beta said. Food too if you're hungry. Bathrooms through that door. If you need anything, pull the cord by the bed. Sarah turned to him, words catching in her throat. Why is he doing this? The beta's expression was carefully neutral. That's between you and the king, miss. He left, closing the door softly behind him. Sarah stood in the center of the room, trembling. She walked to the window and pressed her hands against the cold glass, staring out at the endless valley. She was in the AlphaKing's home. She should be terrified. But the wolf inside her, the one that had been silent her entire life, was quiet now in a different way. Content. Settled. Like she'd finally come home. A knock at the door startled her. Come in. Two maids entered, her arms full of fabric. They smiled at her warm, genuine smiles that made Sarah's chest ache. We've brought clothes, miss, and we've drawn you a bath. A bath? Sarah's throat tightened. When was the last time she'd had a real bath? Not a cold shower in a concrete stall, but an actual bath with hot water. Thank you, she whispered. The maids laid the clothes on the bed and disappeared into the bathroom. Sarah heard water running, smelled something floral and clean drifting through the air. When they emerged, they gestured for her to follow. Take your time, miss. We'll be just outside if you need anything. They left her alone. Sarah stepped into the bathroom and froze. The tub was enormous, sunk into the floor, filled with steaming water. Candles burned on the edges, their flames dancing. Soap and oils sat in glass bottles, nearby labels, written in elegant script. She undressed slowly, her hands shaking. In the mirror, she saw herself clearly for the first time in days. Bruises on her arms from rough handling. Shadows under her eyes like bruises themselves. Skin too pale, bones too sharp. She looked like someone who'd been barely surviving. Sarah sank into the water, and the heat wrapped around her like an embrace. She scrubbed at her skin at the grime and fear and hopelessness until she was pink and raw and clean. When she finally climbed out, she dried off with a towel softer than anything she'd ever touched and wrapped herself in a robe that felt like wearing a cloud. The clothes the maids had left were simple but fine dark leggings, a soft sweater, thick socks. She dressed and sat on the edge of the bed, exhausted and overwhelmed. Another knock. Come in. The door opened and Kieran Thornridge stepped inside. The air left the room. He changed out of his tactical gear into dark jeans and a simple black shirt. Without the armor and weapons, he looked almost human. But the power radiating from him was undeniable, primal, the kind of presence that made lesser wolves instinctively bare their throats. May I? He gestured to the chair near the fireplace. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. Kieran sat his gaze steady on her. Up close, she could see the lines at the corners of his eyes, the silver threaded through his dark hair. He looked like a man who'd carried the weight of the world for too long. How are you feeling? Confused, Sarah said honestly, his mouth almost curved. Almost. Fair. Silence stretched between them. Sarah's pulse hammered in her throat. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to act around someone like him. I brought you food. Kieran gestured to the hallway, and a servant appeared with a tray. Soup, bread, cheese, fruit. The servant placed it on the small table by the window and left without a word. You need to eat, Kieran said. Sarah wanted to argue, but the smell of the soup made her stomach clench with hunger she'd been ignoring for days. She moved to the table and sat picking up the spoon with shaking hands. She took a bite, then another. The soup was rich and warm, and she couldn't stop. She ate half the bowl before she realized he was still watching. Sorry, she mumbled, embarrassed. Don't apologize. His voice was softer now. When's the last time you ate a real meal? Sarah thought about the gray slop they'd served in the Black Ridge dormitory, the portions so small her stomach never stopped aching. A while. Kieran's jaw tightened. He looked away toward the fire, and Sarah saw his hands flex against the armrests of the chair. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked quietly. He was silent for a long moment. Then he turned back to her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Because the moment I walked into that compound and caught your scent, I knew I couldn't leave you there." Sarah's heart stuttered. "Why?" Kieran leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his eyes never leaving hers. "Do you know what a fated mate is, Serafina?" Her throat went dry. "I've heard stories. It's rare, one bond in 1,000. The moon herself chooses two wolves and ties their souls together." His voice dropped rough and raw. "I've searched for mine for 15 years. I'd stopped believing she existed." The meaning of his words slammed into her. "No," she whispered. "That's not possible." "I felt it the second I scented you." Kieran's hands curled into fists. "And when I touched you, when you looked at me, I knew." Sarah shook her head, panic rising. "I'm nobody. I'm not even a real Omega. I've never shifted. I don't—" "You're mine." The words landed like a vow. Sarah stared at him, her whole world tilting. "I don't understand." "You will," Kieran said. He stood, and she had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze. "But right now you need to rest. We'll talk more tomorrow." He walked to the door, then paused, his hand on the frame. He looked back at her, and something in his expression softened. "You're safe here, Serafina. No one will ever sell you again. I give you my word." He left. Sarah sat alone in the firelight, trembling. Fated mate. The AlphaKing's fated mate. It wasn't possible. But deep indeed, her chest, her wolf stirred again. And this time she felt it clearly. Recognition. Longing. Home. Sarah woke to someone knocking urgently on her door. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back, the compound, Kieran, the impossible words he'd spoken. "Miss Ashford, may we come in?" "Yes." Two women entered. The first was older, with kind eyes and silver-streaked brown hair pulled back in a braid. The second was younger, sharp-featured, with an air of quiet authority that reminded Sarah of generals she'd seen on television. "I'm Dr. Evelyn Winters," the older woman said, setting a leather bag on the table. "The Keep's healer. This is Grayson Vale, the King's chief advisor." Sarah's eyes widened. She started to stand, but Grayson waved her down. "Please don't. Dr. Winters is here to examine you. His Majesty requested it." Sarah's stomach tightened. "Examine me." "Standard procedure for anyone brought into the Keep under Crown custody," Evelyn said gently. She approached with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "I just need to check your vitals, take some blood samples. Nothing invasive, I promise." Sarah nodded slowly. Evelyn checked her pulse, her temperature, listened to her heart and lungs. All the while, Grayson stood by the window, watching with an unreadable expression. "I need to take blood now," Evelyn said. "Just a few vials." Sarah extended her arm. The needle pinch was sharp but brief. She watched her blood fill the vials, dark red, ordinary. Evelyn labeled them carefully, then pulled out a small device and pressed it to Sarah's wrist. It beeped softly. Evelyn frowned. "What?" Sarah asked. "Your scent profile." Evelyn looked up, concern etched in her features. "There are trace compounds in your blood that shouldn't be there." Grayson moved closer. "What kind of compounds?" Evelyn pulled out a scanner and ran it over the blood samples. Her frown deepened. "Wolfsbane extract, monk's hood tincture, and traces of diluted silver nitrate." The room went cold. "What does that mean?" Sarah whispered. Evelyn's expression was grim. "Those are suppressants, extremely powerful ones. They're used to chain a wolf, to keep them from shifting, from accessing their strength." Sarah's mind spun. The tonics. Every Tuesday night for as long as she could remember. Kane mixing the bitter liquid in the kitchen. Darius holding her jaw open, their voices telling her it was medicine, that it would help her weak constitution, that she needed it to survive. "They were poisoning me," she said. Her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "Yes," Evelyn said quietly. "Why?" The word broke on the way out. "Why would they do that?" "To keep you weak," Grayson said. His voice was flat, controlled, but anger simmered beneath. To keep you manageable, easier to control. Sarah pressed her hands to her face, nausea rolling through her. Every bitter swallow she'd forced down. Every time Darius had held her chin and tipped the cup to her lips, telling her it was for her own good. Every Tuesday night for 18 years, they'd been chaining her wolf, killing her slowly, making sure she could never be anything more than what they needed her to be. Can you fix it? Grayson asked Evelyn. Yes, but detox will be extremely painful. Evelyn looked at Sarah with sympathy. The suppressants have been in your system since you were a child. Flushing them out means your wolf will finally be able to surface. It's going to hurt. How much? Sarah asked. A lot. Sarah closed her eyes. She thought of the dormitory in the Blackridge compound, the hollow-eyed Omegas, the bruises and the silence, and the complete absence of hope. She thought of her brothers counting cash on the kitchen table while she stood there with a duffel at her feet. Do it, she said. Evelyn nodded. I'll prepare the treatment. It'll take 4 days, maybe 5. You'll need to stay in bed and someone should be with you at all times. I'll inform His Majesty, Grayson said. He left. Evelyn began packing her supplies. She paused, looking at Sarah with something like respect. You're very brave. Sarah didn't feel brave. She felt terrified, but she nodded anyway. Evelyn left to prepare the medicine, and Sarah sat alone staring at the blood vials on the table. Poisoned. They'd poisoned her to keep her weak, to keep her quiet, to keep her from ever becoming a threat. Rage, bright and hot and clean, flared in her chest. For the first time in her life, Seraphina Ashford wanted to fight back. An hour later, the television mounted on the wall flickered to life. Sarah hadn't touched it, but suddenly it was there, a news broadcast, the volume low but clear. And then she saw them. Darius and Kane sat in front of cameras, their faces drawn and grief-stricken. Vaughn sat beside them, eyes red-rimmed, hands shaking like a man on the edge of collapse. Our sister is sick, Darius said, his voice breaking in all the right places. She needs specialized treatment. We sent her to a facility we thought could help her. The interviewer leaned forward, concerned and sympathetic. But then the AlphaKing took her. We don't know where she is, Kane added, his face the perfect mask of worry. We don't know if she's safe. We just want her home. Vaughn's voice was barely a whisper. Please, she's all we have left. The camera cut to the interviewer. You're saying the AlphaKing kidnapped your sister? We're saying he took her without our consent, Darius said carefully. She's fragile. She doesn't understand what's happening. We just want to bring her home where she belongs. The door opened. Kieran stepped inside, Grayson behind him. Kieran's face was carved from stone, but his eyes burned with cold fury. Turn it off, Sarah said quietly. Grayson grabbed the remote and killed the broadcast. Sarah stood, her hands curling into fists. They're lying. I know, Kieran said. They sold me for $75,000. They poisoned me for 18 years. And now they're on television crying like they care. They know how to play the game, Grayson said. They're painting themselves as desperate protective family. It makes His Majesty look like he abused his power. Sarah's nails bit into her palms. What do we do? The council is pressuring me to respond, Kieran said. Some are suggesting I send you back to ease tensions. Sarah's head snapped up. You're not actually considering that. No, Kieran's gaze was fierce. I'm not. But I need you to understand what's happening. This isn't just about you and me anymore. This is political. Then let me fight back. Sarah's voice was steady now, the fear burned away by something hotter. Let me tell the truth. Kieran studied her. If we go public, there's no taking it back. You'll be exposed. Everyone will know who you are, what your brothers did. It won't be easy. I don't care. Sarah met his gaze unflinching. I'm done hiding. Something like pride flashed in Kieran's eyes. Then we do this together, he said. But Grayson shook his head. We need evidence first. Without proof, it's your word against theirs. And they already have public sympathy. I can get proof, Sarah said. Both men looked at her. They think I'm here against my will. She continued, the plan forming as she spoke. They think I'm kidnapped. If I go back, if I pretend I escaped, they'll let their guard down. Absolutely not, Kieran said immediately. I can find the poison, Sarah pressed. I can get the financial records. I know where they keep everything. Kane's careless when he drinks, and Darius always hides things in the same place. I can do this. It's too dangerous, Kieran said. It's my fight. Sarah stepped closer, and for the first time since she'd met him, she didn't lower her gaze. You've done enough. You saved me. But if we're going to finish this, if we're going to make sure they can't hurt anyone else, then let me be the one to do it. Kieran stared at Hero. The air between them crackled with something Sarah couldn't name. Then her wolf stirred and Sarah felt her eyes flash amber. Just for a second. Just long enough. Kieran's expression shifted. He saw it. Saw the strength underneath the fear, the steel beneath the broken surface. She's right, Grayson said quietly. It's the fastest way to get what we need. And if we equip her properly... No, Kieran said again, but his voice was less certain now. Sarah reached out and touched his arm. The contact sent heat racing up her skin, but she didn't pull away. I'm not weak anymore, she said softly. I don't know what I am yet, but I know I'm not that girl they sold. Let me prove it. Kieran looked down at her hand on his arm, then at her face. Something in his expression cracked. If anything happens to you, it won't. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. Grayson, equip her, wire camera tracker, and if anything goes wrong, we extract immediately. Grayson nodded. Sarah felt a surge of something fierce and bright. This was her choice, her fight, her chance to take back everything they had stolen. When do we start? She asked. Tomorrow, Grayson said. You'll need one more day to prepare and to start the detox process. Sarah's stomach dropped. The detox. 4 nights of hell, Evelyn had said, but she'd made her choice. Okay, she whispered. Tomorrow. Evelyn returned that evening with a metal case full of syringes and monitoring equipment. Kieran came with her and didn't leave. This will accelerate the breakdown of the suppressants in your bloodstream, Evelyn explained, holding up the first syringe. You'll feel it within the hour. She administered the shot. Sarah winced at the sting, then lay back against the pillows. Kieran pulled a chair close to the bed and sat. He reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm, rough with calluses. I'm here, he said simply. Sarah held on tight. The first hour wasn't bad, a low fever, some nausea. Sarah dozed fitfully while Kieran sat beside her, his thumb tracing slow circles over her knuckles. But when night fell, the pain hit like a sledgehammer. Sarah woke gasping, her whole body on fire. Her bones ached, her muscles seized. She tried to breathe through it, but it was too much, too fast, too everywhere. Kieran, his name choked out of her. He was there instantly, leaning over her, his face tight with worry. I'm here. I've got you. She clutched his arm, nails digging in. The pain was relentless, sharp and burning and deep in her marrow. She could feel something inside her, something huge and wild clawing its way to the surface. Her wolf, it hurts, she sobbed. I know. Kieran's voice was rough. I know, little wolf, but you're strong. You're stronger than they ever let you believe. Sarah pressed her forehead to his arm, shaking violently. He didn't pull away. Instead, he shifted closer, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other still gripping hers. Breathe with me, he murmured. In, out, in, out. She tried. She focused on the sound of his voice, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his skin against hers. Slowly, the pain ebbed to something bearable. Sarah sagged against him, exhausted. How long? She whispered. 3 more nights, Evelyn said from the corner. She'd been monitoring, quietly staying out of the way. Each one will be harder, but you'll make it. Sarah wasn't sure she believed that, but Kieran's arms tightened around her, and he whispered against her hair. I'm not letting you go. You hear me? I'm not letting you go. Sarah closed her eyes and held on. The second night was worse. The third was unbearable. Sarah screamed until her voice gave out, thrashed until Kieran had to hold her still to keep her from hurting herself. Her wolf raged inside her, furious at being caged for so long, desperate to break free, willing to tear her apart to do it. Kieran never left. He held her through every wave of agony, whispered to her when she couldn't hear, kept her anchored when she thought she'd shatter into pieces. On the 4th morning, the fever broke. Sarah opened her eyes to soft gray light filtering through the windows. Her body ached, but the pain was distant now, manageable. And inside her chest, something purred. Her wolf, awake, aware, strong. Sarah sat up slowly. Kieran was slumped in the chair beside her bed asleep. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. Stubble covered his jaw. He looked exhausted. She reached out and touched his hand gently. His eyes opened instantly, alert. "Hey," she whispered. "Hey." His voice was rough. "How do you feel?" "Different." Sarah flexed her fingers, feeling strength she'd never had before. Power humming under her skin. "I can feel her," she said. "My wolf." Kieran's face broke into the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed him, made him look younger, less burdened. "Good," he said. "That's good." Evelyn appeared, checking Sarah's vitals with brisk efficiency. "Blood pressure's normal, temperature's down. I'd say you're through the worst of it." Sarah exhaled shakily. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Evelyn said. "You've got a mission to complete." "Right, the mission." Sarah looked at Kieran. "When do I go?" "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "Yes." He studied her face, searching for doubt. Finding none. "Tonight," he said finally. "Grayson will brief you in an hour." Sarah nodded. Her heart was racing, but not with fear. With purpose. She was going back to Timber Ridge. Back to the house where they'd poisoned her, sold her, tried to break her. And this time she was bringing evidence that would destroy them. The mission briefing that took place in a room Sarah hadn't seen before, deep in the keep, windowless, lined with maps and tactical equipment that looked military grade. Grayson stood at a table covered in blueprints of her family's house, satellite images of Timber Ridge communication devices small enough to hide in jewelry. "You'll wear this," Grayson said, holding up what looked like an ordinary silver necklace. "Camera in the pendant. Transmits live feed directly to us. We'll see and hear everything." He handed her a watch next. "Tracker. If you trigger the emergency signal, we're 15 minutes out. Closer if we're already mobilized." "Which we will be," Kieran said from the doorway. His voice was hard-controlled. "I'm not letting you walk into that house without backup ready." Sarah looked at him. He'd cleaned up, shaved, changed into fresh tactical gear, but the exhaustion was still there in the lines around his eyes. 4 nights of sitting vigil had taken their toll. "I'll be careful," she said. "You'll be wired and tracked and under surveillance every second," Kieran corrected. "The moment anything feels wrong, I trigger the signal, I know." Grayson cleared his throat. "Your story is simple. You escaped through a service entrance while guards were distracted. You've been hiding in the woods for 2 days. You're scared, confused, and you just want to come home." Sarah's stomach twisted. The idea of pretending she wanted to go back to that house, to those people, made her skin crawl. "They'll be suspicious," she said. "Of course they will," Grayson agreed. "But they're also greedy. If they think there's a chance to sell you back to Blackridge for more money, they'll lower their guard." "What exactly am I looking for?" "Everything," Kieran said. He moved to the table and pointed to the blueprint. "The poison supply, financial records, the original contract they signed, anything that proves systematic abuse and trafficking." "Kane keeps his business documents in the office upstairs," Sarah said, studying the map. "Second floor, end of the hall. Darius hides cash in the basement behind the water heater." "The tonics," she stopped, her throat tightening. "The tonics were always in the kitchen, top cabinet left side. Kane mixed them there every Tuesday." Kieran's hand curled into a fist on the table. "How long do you need?" Grayson asked. "An hour," Sarah said. "Maybe less if they're drinking. They always drink after dark." "You get in, you get the evidence, you get out," Kieran said. His voice was steel. "No heroics, no confrontations. Oh, just the mission." Sarah nodded, but inside her wolf growled low and hungry. She wanted more than evidence. She wanted them to see what they tried to destroy. They drove her within a mile of Timber Ridge and led her out on a dark stretch of road. Sarah wore her old clothes, the same jeans and sweaters she'd been wearing when they took her. Grayson had made them dirty, torn them, slightly made it look like she'd been living rough. The necklace rested cold against her collarbone. The watch circled her wrist like a shackle, but this time it was armor, not a prison. 15 minutes, Kieran said again. He stood beside the vehicle, silhouetted against the headlights. "You trigger that signal and we come in full force." "I know." He stepped closer, and for a moment she thought he might reach for her. Instead, his hand lifted and brushed her cheek just once, so quickly she almost missed it. "Come back to me," he said quietly. It wasn't a command, it was a plea. "I will," Sarah whispered. She turned and walked into the darkness. The mile to her family's house felt like 10. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound made her jump. But her wolf was awake now, alert, feeding her information she'd never had before. She could smell the forest pine sap and moss and wet earth, could hear small animals moving through underbrush 50 feet away, could sense the absence of other predators. She was alone. The house appeared through the trees exactly as she remembered. Sagging porch, broken railing, one window glowing yellow from the living room lamp that was always on. Sarah took a breath and walked up the driveway. She knocked. Footsteps inside. Heavy stumbling. The door opened and Vaughn stood there, eyes bleary and red-rimmed bourbon on his breath. He stared at her like she was a ghost. "Sarah." "Dad." Her voice cracked perfectly. "Please, I need help." Vaughn's mouth worked. Then he turned and shouted into the house. "Boys, get out here." Darius appeared first, Kane right behind him. They both froze when they saw her. "What the hell?" Darius started. "I escaped," Sarah said. She let herself shake, let her voice break. "I've been hiding in the woods. I didn't know where else to go." Kane's eyes narrowed. "Escaped from the AlphaKing. From the keep. There was a distraction, some kind of alarm. I ran." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. "Please, I just want to come home." The brothers exchanged a glance. Sarah could almost see the calculations happening behind their eyes. Could she be telling the truth? Was this a trap, but more importantly, could they profit from this? "Come inside," Darius said finally. Sarah stepped over the threshold and nausea rolled through her. The house smelled exactly the same: stale beer and cigarette smoke and the faint chemical tang of the tonics that had poisoned her for 18 years. She was inside. The camera in her necklace was recording everything. "Sit," Kane said, pointing to the couch. Sarah sat. Vaughn hovered nearby, still drunk and useless. Darius and Kane stood over her like predators circling prey. "Start talking," Darius said. "There's not much to tell," Sarah said. She kept her voice small, scared. "They took me from the compound, put me in this big room in a castle. The AlphaKing kept asking me questions about you, about our family, about why I was at Black Ridge." "What did you tell him?" Kane asked sharply. "I didn't know what to say. I was scared." Sarah looked up at them with wide eyes. "Did I do something wrong? Is that why you sent me away?" Darius's face softened slightly. "Good." He believed the helpless act. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said, his tone almost kind. "We were trying to help you. The AlphaKing had no right to take you." "We've been worried sick," Kane added. It was a lie so blatant Sarah almost laughed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I just want things to go back to normal." The brothers exchanged another glance. Then Darius nodded. "Why don't you rest?" he said. "You must be exhausted. We'll figure out what to do in the morning." "Okay." Sarah stood slowly. Can I get some water first?" "I'll get it," Kane said. He headed for the kitchen. Darius followed. Sarah heard them talking in low voices, too quiet for normal human hearing. But her wolf heard perfectly. "Call Ronan. She's worth double now. Wait until morning. She's not going anywhere. Keep her locked in her room, just in case." Sarah's hands curled into fists. They were planning to sell her again. Tonight. She had maybe an hour before they made the call. Kane returned with a glass of water. "Here." "Thank you." Sarah took it, drank half. "I think I'll go to bed now." "Good idea," Darius said. "Your room's the same?" Sarah climbed the stairs, feeling their eyes on her back. She went into her old room, still bare, still cold, still smelling faintly of the desperation she'd lived in for 23 years. She closed the door and waited, counted to 100. Then she opened it silently and slipped into the hallway. The office was at the end of the hall, door closed. Sarah pressed her ear against it. No sounds. She tested the handle, unlocked. Careless. Inside the office was exactly as she remembered. Desk covered in papers, filing cabinet in the corner window overlooking the backyard. She moved to the desk, first opening drawers as quietly as possible. Bank statements, credit card bills, and there a folder labeled Black Ridge. Sarah opened it. Contract inside. Her name, her details, the terms of sale. $75,000 for one unregistered Omega female. Signatures at the bottom. Darius Ashford, Kane Ashford, Vaughn Ashford. And a receipt. Proof of payment. She held it up to the necklace camera, making sure every word was visible. Then she moved to the filing cabinet, found more documents, emails between Darius and Ronan, discussing merchandise spreadsheets, tracking other Omegas sold over the years, photos of girls Sarah didn't recognize. Her brothers weren't just guilty of selling her. They'd been doing this for years. Sarah's wolf snarled inside her chest, demanding blood. Not yet, she told it. Not yet. She photographed everything, then carefully returned the documents to their places. One more thing. Sarah crept back downstairs. The kitchen was dark, but she knew it by heart. Top cabinet left side. She opened it. Bottles lined the shelf. Brown glass handwritten labels. Wolf's Bane extract. Monk's Hood tincture. Silver nitrate solution. 18 years of poison. Sarah grabbed 2 bottles, enough for evidence, and shoved them in her jacket pockets. Then she heard voices. Calling him now. He'll pay more if we deliver her tonight. Tie her up first. Don't trust that scared act. They were coming upstairs. Sarah ran. She made it to her room just as she heard their footsteps on the stairs. Closed the door silently, pressed her back against it, heart hammering. The footsteps stopped outside her door. The handle turned. Sarah dove for the window, threw it open. The roof was right below. She could make it to the ground, into the trees, but they'd see her. They'd know Sarah, Darius's voice. Right outside, no time, Sarah jumped. She hit the porch roof hard, rolled, dropped to the ground. Pain exploded through her ankle, but her wolf pushed through it, pushed her up, pushed her running. Behind her, she heard shouting. The front door slamming open. She's running. Get her! Sarah sprinted into the woods. Branches tore at her face, her ankle screamed. But she ran faster than she'd ever run in her life, her wolf lending her speed and strength she'd never had before. Headlights swept through the trees. They'd gotten in the truck. Sarah triggered the emergency signal on her watch and kept running. She could hear the truck crashing through the underbrush behind her, Darius and Kane shouting, getting closer, closer. Then another engine, louder, multiple vehicles. Sarah risked a glance back and saw them, black SUVs, at least 6 converging from all directions. She stumbled to a stop, gasping. The SUVs formed a perimeter. Doors opened. Armed men poured out, tactical gear, weapons raised. Grayson led the formation, and Kieran stepped out of the lead vehicle. His eyes found hers immediately, scanned her for injuries. Then he looked past her at the truck that had been chasing her. Darius slammed on the brakes. Kane was already trying to run. Hold! Grayson's voice cracked like a whip. Crowned soldiers surrounded the truck. Darius and Kane were dragged out, thrown to the ground, hands zip-tied behind their backs. Kieran walked past them without a glance, came straight to Sarah. Did you get it? He asked. Sarah pulled the bottles from her pockets, held them up. All of it. Something fierce and proud blazed in Kieran's eyes. Good, he said. Now let's finish this. Where? The Senate Turbo took place 3 days later in the federal building in Denver. The chamber was massive marble floors, vaulted ceilings, hundreds of seats, filled with senators, council members, media crews, cameras everywhere. Sarah sat in a private room adjacent to the chamber, wearing a midnight blue gown that Kieran's staff had brought her. Silver embroidery traced the neckline and sleeves. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek twist. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked strong, whole. A knock on the door. Kieran entered, dressed in formal black, with his crown insignia on his chest. Ready? He asked. No, Sarah said honestly, but let's do it anyway. He smiled, small but real. That's my girl. They walked into the chamber together and the room fell silent. Sarah kept her chin up, her shoulders back. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, but she didn't lower her gaze. Her wolf purred inside her chest, content and strong. At the far end of the chamber, her brothers sat with Ronan Blackridge. Darius and Kane wore suits, their faces arranged in practiced grief. Vaughn shook beside them, looking older and more broken than Sarah had ever seen him. Ronan looked confident, like he thought money and power would save him. They had no idea what was coming. The head senator, a stern woman with iron gray hair, called the session to order. We are here to address charges brought by the Crown against Ronan Blackridge, Darius Ashford, Kane Ashford, and Vaughn Ashford. The charges include trafficking, systematic abuse, poisoning, and conspiracy. She turned to Sarah. Miss Ashford, you may present your testimony. Sarah stood, every camera in the room focused on her. She walked to the podium, her heels clicking against marble, set her notes down though she didn't need them. She'd lived this story. She knew every word. "My name is Serafina Ashford," she began. Her voice was steady, clear. "For 18 years, my brothers poisoned me. Every Tuesday night, they forced me to drink tonics that contained wolfsbane extract, monk's hood tincture, and silver nitrate solution." She held up the bottles, showed them to the cameras. "These are suppressants designed to chain a wolf, to keep them from shifting, from accessing their strength. My brothers used them to keep me weak, to keep me manageable, to make sure I could never fight back." Gasps rippled through the chamber. "And when they decided I was no longer useful, when their gambling debts became too large to ignore, they sold me." Sarah pulled out the contract, held it up. $75,000. That's what I was worth to them. That's what they accepted from Ronan Blackridge in exchange for one unregistered Omega female. She displayed it on the screens around the room. The signatures, the terms, the payment receipt. "They told me I was going to work, that I'd be treated fairly, but they knew the truth. They knew exactly what Ronan Blackridge does with unregistered Omegas." Sarah turned to look at Ronan. His confidence was cracking now, his face pale. "And when the AlphaKing rescued me, when he invoked Crown law to take me into protective custody, my brothers went on television and lied. They cried about their sick sister. They begged for my return." She played the clip of their interview. Let the chamber watch them perform their grief. "2 days later, I returned to gather evidence. They didn't recognize me because they didn't expect me to be strong, didn't expect me to fight back." Sarah's voice hardened. "And while I was there, I heard them planning to sell me again, this time for $100,000. She played the audio recording from her necklace camera. Her brothers' voices discussing her resale like she was livestock. The chamber erupted, senators leaning forward, media crews scrambling, Ronan trying to stand, being forced back down by guards. Darius tried to speak. "We didn't know, liar." Sarah's voice cut through the noise like a blade. The room went silent. "You held me down," Sarah said, her voice shaking now with rage instead of fear. "Every Tuesday, 7 p.m., Kane would mix the tonic in the kitchen. You would force my jaw open and pour it down my throat while I choked. You told me it was medicine. You told me it was for my own good." She walked toward them now, descending from the podium. "You told me I was weak, broken, worthless. You made me believe I was nothing." She stopped right in front of them. "But you were wrong." And then Sarah let her wolf rise. Her eyes flashed amber. Power rolled off her in waves, dominance, authority, strength that had been caged for 23 years and was finally free. The alphas in the room instinctively lowered their heads. Even senators, even council members felt the pressure of it. Darius and Kane dropped their gazes, unable to hold hers. "You tried to bury me," Sarah said softly. "You didn't know you were planting a queen." The chamber was dead silent. Then Dr. Evelyn Winters stood. "May I present medical evidence?" she asked. The head senator nodded, still staring at Sarah with something like awe. Evelyn displayed scans, blood work, chemical analysis on the screens around the chamber. "Serafina Ashford carries the royal silver bloodline," Evelyn said, "a heritage thought extinct for over 200 years. The suppressants in her system weren't just abuse, they were an attempt to cage one of the most powerful bloodlines in wolf history." The chamber erupted again. Ronan's face had gone from pale to ashen. He'd sold royalty for $75,000. The head senator called for order. When the room finally quieted, she turned to Sarah. "Miss Ashford, as the victim in this case, Crown law allows you to determine sentencing for your family. What is your decision?" Sarah looked at her brothers, at her father, at the men who'd poisoned her, sold her, tried to destroy her. Her wolf wanted blood, but Sarah wanted something else. "Strip them of the Ashford name," she said. "Banish them to the fringe territories in Alaska. No pack protection, no financial support. They'll learn what it means to survive with nothing." Darius's face went white. "You can't." "I can." Sarah's voice was ice. "You taught me that everything has a price. Now you'll learn what it costs to have nothing." Kane was shaking. "We're your brothers." "You were," Sarah said quietly. "You stopped being family when you chose money over blood." Vaughn collapsed forward, sobbing. I'm sorry, Sarah, I'm so sorry. Sarah turned away. She couldn't look at him, couldn't waste another moment on people who'd wasted 23 years of her life. And Ronan Blackridge, the senator asked. Life imprisonment, Kieran said, standing now. His pack is dissolved, his territory seized by the crown, and every Omega he trafficked will be found and freed. Ronan tried to protest. Guards dragged him away, still shouting. Darius and Kane were removed next to their faces, masks of shock and rage. Vaughn was carried out broken. Sarah stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by cameras and witnesses, and the weight of justice finally served. Kieran appeared at her side. You did it, he said quietly. We did it, Sarah corrected. He smiled. And then in front of everyone, he took her hand. 1 year later, Sarah stood in the doorway of Haven House watching workers put the finishing touches on the main hall. Warm wood, soft lighting, comfortable furniture. It looked like a home, not an institution. The shelter sat on the exact spot where the Ashford house had stood. Sarah had burned that house to the ground herself, watched it collapse into ash. In memory, from the ruins she'd built something better. First residents arrive tomorrow, Evelyn said, appearing beside her with a clipboard. 24 Omegas from Blackridge territory, plus 8 from other trafficking cases. Sarah's chest tightened with emotion. Are we ready? As ready as we'll ever be. Footsteps behind them. Sarah turned and saw Kieran striding across the grounds, Grayson beside him. He'd been in council meetings all morning, but he'd promised to visit before the shelter opened. When he reached her, he pulled her into a quick embrace. How's it looking? He asked. Good, really good. They walked through the shelter together. Sarah explained her plans, counseling services, job training programs, medical care, educational support for younger wolves who'd missed schooling. It was ambitious. It was needed. And it was hers. That evening back at Obsidian Ridge, Sarah stood on the balcony overlooking the valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Kieran joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. She leaned back against his chest. The council is asking again, he murmured. About what? When we're making it official. Sarah's heart skipped. They'd been dancing around this conversation for months. The mate bond was fully formed, acknowledged by both of them. But taking the next step, making her his queen in title as well as truth, that was different. Are you asking me to marry you? She teased lightly. Not yet. Kieran's breath was warm against her ear. When I ask, it'll be more romantic than a balcony conversation about council politics. Sarah laughed. Then she turned in his arms, looking up at him. Ask me now. Kieran blinked. What? Ask me here. Now. Sarah's smile was small but sure. I don't need grand gestures, Kieran. I just need you. His expression shifted, surprise, giving way to something fierce and tender. He cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. Seraphina Ashford, he said, his voice low and rough. Will you be my mate, my queen, my partner in all things? Will you stand with me and let me stand with you for the rest of our lives? Tears pricked Sarah's eyes, but she smiled through them. Yes. Kieran kissed her, then deep and claiming and full of promise. Sarah melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, her wolf singing with joy. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he whispered. I love you too. Dr. 6 months later, Sarah stood in front of a mirror, staring at her reflection. The gown was midnight blue with silver embroidery that caught the light with every movement. Her hair was swept up, a delicate crown of silver buttoning on her head. She looked like a queen. She felt like a girl who used to scrub floors and swallow poison. Stop overthinking, Evelyn said behind her, adjusting a strand of Sarah's hair. What if I mess up? You won't, and even if you do, no one will care. They already love you. It was true. Over the past year, Sarah had become a fixture in the Northern Territories. Haven House had expanded to 5 locations. She'd pushed for new laws protecting unregistered wolves. She'd spoken at councils, visited packs, shown up for people who'd never had anyone show up for them. The people called her the Silver Queen. Sarah called herself a survivor. A knock at the door. It's time, Grayson called. Sarah took a deep breath. Evelyn squeezed her hand once, then stepped back. Go get your king. Sarah walked through the halls of Obsidian Ridge, her gown trailing behind her. Guards lined the corridors, bowing as she passed. She felt their respect, their loyalty. She'd earned it. The great hall doors opened. Music swelled. Sarah stepped inside and the crowd rose. At the far end, Kieran waited on the dais, dressed in formal black, his crown glinting in the candlelight. When their eyes met, he smiled, and it was like the rest of the world fell away. Sarah walked down the aisle, her heart pounding, but her steps sure. When she reached him, he offered his hand. She took it. The ceremony was beautiful. Ancient words spoken in the old tongue, translated by the officiant. Vows exchanged, promises of partnership, protection, equality. A crown placed on her head beside his. When it was over, Kieran kissed her in front of everyone, and the hall erupted in cheers. That night, there was the feast that lasted until dawn. But eventually, Sarah and Kieran slipped away to their private balcony, just the two of them under the stars. "How does it feel?" Kieran asked, his arm around her waist. "Surreal." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. 18 months ago, I was being sold in a Black Ridge compound. Now I'm a queen." "You were always a queen," Kieran said softly. "You just needed the world to see it." Sarah smiled. She thought about her brothers banished and forgotten in Alaska, about Ronan rotting in a federal prison, about the shelter that bore her name and the laws that would protect countless others. She'd taken her pain and turned it into purpose. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Bringing me here, all the complications that came with me." Kieran tilted her chin up, his gaze intense. "Not for a single second." He kissed her again, slow and deep, and Sarah felt the bond between them hum with contentment. She was home. Not because of a place or a title, but because of the man beside her, the life they'd built, and the wolf in her that finally felt free. 3 years after that, Sarah stood in the training yard of the Montana Haven House, watching a young Omega named Lena complete her first shift. It was messy and painful, but when it was over, Lena stood on 4 legs and howled with joy. Sarah smiled. She remembered that feeling. "Another success," Evelyn said, appearing at her side. "Another life changed," Sarah corrected. Kieran joined them, his hand finding Sarah's automatically. "The council wants to expand to the Southern Territories," he said. "Good." Sarah's gaze stayed on Lena, who was now playing with the other young wolves. "We'll need more funding." "Already approved." Kieran's grin was smug. "I'm very persuasive." Sarah laughed. "You're impossible. And you love me for it." "I really do." They stood together, watching the sunset over Timber Ridge, over the shelter that had saved so many, over the life they'd built from ashes and pain and impossible hope. Sarah was 29 now. She ran a nationwide network of 67 shelters. She mentored 3 generations of leaders, survivors in their 40s and 50s, who became directors, who trained counselors, young Omegas who became advocates. She testified before Congress, changed federal law, built institutions that would outlast her. And every night she stood on her balcony at Obsidian Ridge with Kieran's arms around her and looked out at a kingdom where Omegas were protected, valued free. "They poisoned me for 18 years, Sarah said quietly. "Sold me for $75,000. Thought they'd destroyed me." Kieran's arms tightened around her. "The girl they sold became the queen who saved thousands." "Not a queen," Sarah said. "A survivor who refused to let others suffer alone." Aurora, her wolf, howled then, long and proud and free. And from 67 shelters across the territories, thousands of voices answered. Sarah closed her eyes and listened to the chorus. She'd called for help in the darkness, and Kieran had heard her. Now together they answered everyone else's calls. The girl her brother sold for $75,000 had become worth more than they could ever measure. Not in money, in lives saved, in laws changed, in wolves freed from chains they didn't even know they wore. Seraphina Thornridge, the Silver Queen, had turned her poison into medicine, and she was just getting started.